Good
And
morning, everyone. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh no, I was just going to say, Emily, you had mentioned that we had some initial polls. I don't know. I just want to make sure that you had talked to Erin about them.
Yeah, we will launch those after we do our introductions.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry, I'm done.
You're fine. I'm Amy Snyder from the Connect and Communicate Series Planning Committee, and I am the moderator of the session. And I want to thank all of you for joining us for this presentation, Policies, Platforms, and Promotion, Social Media for Every Library. This discussion will be recorded and made available to Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division members through the PALA website and also on the CRD blog. For this discussion, you will only need a headset or speakers. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat box at the bottom right throughout the discussion, and we'll attempt to include them as appropriate through the discussion or wait till the end. And we'll also do our best to assist participants with technical issues. So if you have any sort of technical issues, please post those to the chat box as well. Policies, Platforms, and Promotions, Social Media for Every Library is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division's Connect and Communicate Series Planning Committee. I'd like to thank the CRD board for supporting the Connect and Communicate initiative and the other Connect and Communicate Planning Committee members, which include Erin Burns, Diane Porterfield, Ryan Settler, Amanda Avery, Rana Lee, Fiocco, and Sarah Pike. And I'd like to acknowledge PALA for allowing us to bring this discussion to you through Zoom. Thank you to Diane for doing our closed captioning for today's session. If you haven't done so already, we are keeping track of attendance, so please type the number of attendees at your location if more than one of you is watching into the chat box. And finally, I'd like to thank and introduce our panelists for today's event. Emily Moras is the business librarian and library outreach coordinator at Penn State Harrisburg Library in Middletown, PA. Emily holds an MLIS from the University of Pittsburgh and MED in instructional technology from East Stroudsburg University. Josephine Smith is the Instruction and Assessment Librarian at Shippensburg University in Shippensburg, PA. Josephine holds an MLIS degree from the University of Pittsburgh and a Master's in American Studies from Penn State Harrisburg. June Hoteling is the District Consultant for North Central Library District based out of James V. Brown Library in Williamsport, PA. June holds an MSLS from Clarion University. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our presenters.
Welcome, everybody. This is Josephine Smith. I'm going to be taking us through the PowerPoint, and the different presenters obviously will be speaking at different times, but I just wanted to welcome you to our webinar today, Policies, Platforms, and Promotions, Social Media for Every Library. At the bottom of the screen in front of you has the list of presenters that Amy just introduced, as well as our broader PAL social media team, including Tegan Connor-Cole, John Siegel, and Liz Klesner. This project was made possible in part by a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services as administered by the Pennsylvania Department of Education through the Office of the Commonwealth Libraries and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, including Tom Wolfe, Governor. So as you saw on the first screen, this webinar is part of a larger social media project as part of PALS, which is the PALA Academy of Leadership Studies, which is basically just a series of leadership skills workshops for Pennsylvania library professionals. The project cycle is about a year, so it starts with an initial couple-day event, and then you join a team to do research and find best practices for a particular area that PALA sets out for you. So our team goal was to evaluate existing social media policies across the spectrum of libraries and library associations, to generate a generalized policy template for PALA members, and as well as kind of narrow down some PALA policy, social media policies for the organization as a whole. So the team members are Emily Moras, who's presenting today, myself, Josephine Smith, who's also obviously presenting, Tegan Connor-Cole, John Siegel, and Liz Klesner, and our mentor was June Hoteling. So as I said, my name is Josephine Smith. I'm coming to you from Shippensburg University. I'm the Instruction and Assessment Librarian here, and I'm going to turn it over to the other presenters to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Josephine. Erin, could we launch the poll to find out where all of our attendees, what kind of libraries they work in, while June and I and Josephine talk a little bit about social media at our library? Great, thank you. So we're going to be polling today, so you should see some different polls pop up at different times in front of you. Please take a moment just to respond to that poll, and we will take a look at those results in a little bit. So I'm Emily Moras. I'm at Penn State Harrisburg Library, and our presenters are just going to kind of give a little round robin right now and talk about social media at our libraries. June, would you like to get us started?
Sure, thanks, Emily. I am June Hotailing, and I'm the mentor for this PALS group, and I'm here today on behalf of the public librarians on the team who completed the work but weren't able to join us today. So the evolution of social media at Brown, we adopted social media more than a decade ago. It started out with Facebook, then Twitter in 2009, and then in 2014, the library became an Instagram user. It became apparent in the early years of Facebook that accounts needed to be streamlined and certain employees given authority to post. So admins and managers were strategically added. The library created a posting plan that evolves around creating a bookish community. We post to Facebook 3 times per day with a weekly newsletter, auto-posting every week. We do several tweets a day and 1 post to Instagram per day, as we find those are a little bit more time-consuming. We do what we call a Friday funny post and a Saturday silly, and for the most part, we don't post across platforms. Each one has their own audience. For instance, we use Instagram for more people-focused posts. The library's most popular Instagram post is actually circulation checking in books at time warp speed. We have a series of Meet the Staff posts that were also very successful. Josephine?
Hi, so this is Josephine Smith again. At Shippensburg University, or at the library, I should say, at Ezra Lehman Library, we don't have one person whose sole job is to, or whose sole responsibility is to manage our social media and outreach. Right now, our STEM librarian, Maggie Smith, is coordinating all of our social media and broader outreach efforts. We do participate and have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, a blog, and Pinterest. Pinterest is not managed very regularly. It was piloted at one point, but it's kind of not something we post to very often. Our most active are Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and blog. We cross-post considerably. So our blog is probably our most active. We do a weekly blog post, which is cross-posted to Facebook. We do have Twitter, which kind of pushes out some of the blog posts and those types of posts that we want to highlight. We do about 1 to 2 posts on Facebook a week, and then that's cross-posted to Twitter and then Instagram, and we have image-based different types of posting depending on the platform. But most of our content is cross-posted, and most of it focuses on events that we're trying to market or push for. If there's any changes in hours or anything like that, workshops, that type of thing. We don't have, at this point, we don't do a whole lot of engagement types of posts. That's something I would like to change in the future, but for right now, it's mostly just to inform our audience, which is primarily Shippensburg University faculty, staff, and students.
Thanks, Josephine. So this is Emily, and again, I'm at Penn State Harrisburg Library. I was first hired here in 2016, and one of my responsibilities when I came into the position was to create and manage a social media presence for our library, which hadn't been done up until that point. In addition to doing social media for the library, I'm a tenure track librarian there, and I have liaison duties to the School of Business Administration. So social media is just one of my many responsibilities. When I got started, I reviewed all of the social media accounts for other Penn State libraries, as well as Penn State University's existing social media guidelines. And I did a little bit of research on how libraries in general are using social media, how students themselves use social media and want to interact with their educational institutions via social media platforms, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. And with this information, I created a report for my library director explaining my rationale for creating a Facebook and an Instagram account for our library and a social media policy for both of those accounts. My primary reason for selecting these platforms were the target user demographics for each platform, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I chose Facebook to reach more of our faculty and staff audience because those are the people that are more likely to use Facebook, and Instagram to reach our student audience. I don't really have a ton of time to dedicate to social media management, so that's why we kind of kept it to just two platforms, and we kind of limit it just to that way. We do a lot of cross promotion as well, but there are specific messages that just go to kind of one platform or the other. Our students still use our Facebook page as a point of quick contact, so we will get Facebook messages if someone is being too loud on a different floor of the library, or if students have questions. They're pretty commonly, we'll send those into Facebook Messenger, or sometimes will message us on Instagram as well. Our content promotes using the library and our many services, and just like Josephine said, we alert people to changes in our hours, promoting our events and other events or resources of interest to our library users on campus. I also use Hootsuite to schedule posts, and sometimes I schedule up to a month in advance if I'm especially busy, which just happened this week. I scheduled for the rest of May, but even when things are scheduled, I try to check in to our accounts daily, even if we have something already canned, ready to go. So now we are going to jump ahead.
Do we want to, in case you are seeing the post results, I just wanted to say hello to our public, academic, and special library attendees. And we will be kind of pointing to the different kind of specific manifestations as we go along.
Yep. So now we're going to talk about what is a social media policy and why do you need one. So while I missed one, we're actually going to talk about our webinar goals, and then we're going to talk about why you might need a social media policy. So by the end of today's webinar, we hope that you will be able to explain the importance of a social media policy or guidelines, and how to develop or update your policy if you already have one. How to identify the most useful tools for library social media engagement, respective of your library type and your goals. Discuss best practices for engagement, content creation, and effective use of social media, and to consider the ethical and legal ramifications of social media use by your library. Also, we will be referring to a few different resources today that our PALS team put together for the association. I'm going to put a link here in the chat for everyone to access these documents. Hold on, it doesn't seem to be pasting. One moment. And it's also there on the slide. You are welcome to access these documents at any time. So now that is live. And we'll make sure that the link is also attached to the recording when it goes up on the CRD website. Just so you know, these documents are completed, but they have not been officially adopted by the association as of yet. So they will say draft on all of them. They are going to be in draft mode until they are accepted by the association. At that time, we will take them off of Google Drive and they will find a permanent home on the Pennsylvania Library Association website. So now we're going to talk about what is a social media policy and why do you need one. So Erin, if we could launch the next poll while I am talking about social media policies. So as I mentioned, one of my first duties when I started at Penn State Harrisburg was to come up with a social media policy. Penn State University has its own guidelines for all university units, and it doesn't require that individual units create their own policy. But at my library, we wanted to have a chain of responsibility for the accounts and a plan to manage the accounts if for some reason I, as the primary social media coordinator, wasn't able to do so. Ultimately, our social media policy is a document that defines who is responsible for representing the library online and how they're going to conduct themselves. We can switch to the next slide. So what is a social media policy for? You can view draft social media templates and questions to consider when writing your social media policy in our Google folder. So the link that I just shared, we have a draft policy for academic libraries, a draft policy for public libraries, and then an overall best practices document that contains a little bit more information that applies to any type of library. Your social media policy should detail the platforms you use, provide a rationale for why you're using those platforms, who is responsible for the accounts, what kind of content you will share, and how often you'll share it. It might also detail the process for starting a new account or deleting an old one. This helps with planning and accountability. A social media policy can also help defend you against legal trouble related to social media posting. Your policy should make staff aware of copyright issues, plagiarism, and fair use as they relate to your library's social media activities. You can also use your policy to remind staff about confidentiality and to establish firm boundaries between professional and personal use of social media. You wouldn't contact a patron via Facebook public post and let them know that their interlibrary loan books by title had arrived at the library, but that's actually happened at a library that one of us knows about. This example illustrates how the lines between personal and professional communication can become increasingly blurred online. Having a policy helps you set strict guidelines for appropriate social media behavior when representing the library, and it can help you take corrective action when, if an unacceptable behavior occurs. It lets employees know what is acceptable to post and share from both the library's account and from employees' personal accounts concerning the library. So it looks like we're a little bit split of those who know if they have a policy. We've got 38% for each. And then Erin, if you want to launch that second poll. Just so everyone knows, Vegas rules do not apply to social media, so it does not stay there. And, once it's out there, anything can happen. There could be a magnifying effect, and a wayward post can become nearly impossible to retract. Ultimately, your social media policy empowers employees to share the library's message because your policy should clearly define the image your library is going to maintain online. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some case studies in library social media.
And Emily, do we want to show, when do we want to wrap up this poll for if it's public or internal?
We'll just give it a couple more seconds. June can start talking about
great.
The Aurora Public Library.
Okay, about a year ago, the Aurora Public Library displayed a quote-unquote satirical poem superimposed on a Confederate flag. The library didn't include any contextual material or explanation, and the satire just didn't ring true for many. Library visitors posted a photo of the poem on Facebook, and it went viral in a really negative way. The library responded via Facebook stating, "Some have commented on the satirical nature of the poem. Others viewed it as hate speech. We are pleased that people are talking." The library's response generated even more backlash, culminating in the removal of the poem and the resignation of the communications manager. People were not pleased with the library's Facebook responses to their criticism, did not feel that their statements reflected a genuine apology when the poem was removed, nor did the responses grapple with the damage that was caused, nor did it foster an important dialogue with those who viewed the poem as offensive. So when responding to controversial issues or criticism, social media may not be the best platform because it often lacks the ability to convey nuance and context. Be aware of your messaging, especially regarding sensitive topics. Realize that your social media accounts are often the first point of access for your patrons in this digital age, and treat your content accordingly. Think carefully about commenting policies and settings and what kinds of content you will post and respond to. Have a plan. Make sure several people review the plan and stick to the plan. Finding a balance is important. In contrast, Barnard Library at Barnard College, where a student was physically restrained by police in a video that also went viral, made no mention of the incident on its social media accounts. But it also doesn't appear to be receiving feedback via social media on the incident either. So libraries will need to decide for themselves before a controversy happens when, where, and how they'll respond. Emily?
Thanks, June. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the New York Public Library. As I mentioned earlier, it's always a really good idea to see what other libraries are doing online or just other organizations are doing online. It's a really great place to get inspiration. And one place that I get a lot of inspiration is the New York Public Library. As I said on the slide, they are my hashtag social media goals. They're present on a ton of platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, YouTube, and they have a bunch of blogs and also podcasts. podcasts, so they engage with users specifically in the New York area that can come physically visit them, but also people around the world because they make use of a lot of different online internet enabled collections that anyone can access. So like I said, it's really great to see what other accounts are doing. Follow those accounts. They're probably going to follow you back. One thing to keep in mind about social media platforms these days is that they are algorithm driven, so that the more people interact with your content, the more likely it's going to be shown in others' feeds. So if you follow a lot of other libraries in general, public or academic or special, they may follow you back and you can interact with each other's posts, and that helps boost your content to the top of the feed. If you like what a library is doing, you can also share their content on your pages with proper attribution. Facebook and Twitter make it really easy to kind of reshare, reblog, Tumblr as well, content made by others, and it automatically attributes that content to the library wherever you got it from. There's some other ways for attributing for different resources if you need to do that, but if I'm stuck and I'm not sure what kind of content I can post that day, it's always a really good idea to kind of look around, see what anybody else is posting, and then I can share that and get my posting in for the day without too much sweating. So now we're going to jump forward a little bit and talk about developing your policy since we already did our poll. All right, so as I mentioned, the policy documents are available in our Google Drive. So the link is in the chat. Let me see if I can post that again for everybody. And we do have one for academic libraries. We also have one for public libraries. These were created in reference, or not reference, but we use the ALA Office of Intellectual Freedom Social Media Policy outline to develop this one, as well as some additional guidelines that we had found online from different library associations and different types of libraries. So if you have more questions about the social media guidelines, I would strongly encourage you to check out the ALA Office of Intellectual Freedom's social media guidelines area that is referenced in both of those policy documents, and there's some more information there. So there are some key areas that your policy should address. It should address why your library is using social media, who your primary audience is so that your content is targeted to them. So at my library, our primary audience is our faculty, staff, and students. We have tertiary audiences of the local community, maybe other Penn State libraries, and there's different messages that we would communicate to those different areas. So people that are actually on our campus are probably going to be most interested in if there's a change in our hours or if something is happening that we'd like them to attend, whereas a broader Penn State audience might just like Penn State themed content, but might not care if we're closing early today, something like that. So you need to think about who your audiences are. It should also detail the kind of content you're going to share and how often you're going to share it. And we do have some guidelines that we'll talk about later for the different platforms and how frequently you should be posting to those different platforms. It should talk about behavior standards for your employee use of accounts. So what is appropriate or inappropriate to share. Telling people that their books are in is definitely one of those inappropriate things, but it also goes beyond that. And then there's also guidelines and some types of behavior standards for handling abusive content or controversial content, which that can really depend on your library type. Public libraries are subject to more scrutiny because a lot of that is seen more as free speech than academic libraries that may not be seen as a public forum. So when you're making your policy, it's going to be really important for you to talk to any council that your library has, work with your library administrators and a library board if you have one, so that everyone can review it and make sure that everyone is on the right page and kind of in the legal clear. There's some more guidance on that at ALA in the Office of Intellectual Freedom. And if you take a look at our best practices document, Josephine, would you be able to share that? See if we could take a look there.
You want me to pull it up? Yep.
Sure.
Let me just hold on a second. Doop. All right, so right now you should be able to see on your screen the document, the library social media best practices guide. As Emily mentioned, there is a draft watermark over it. We do have a table of contents. We've narrowed down.
And can you go to page 6 where we have
Sure.
the questions to ask when developing your social media policy?
Yes, ma'am.
There we go. So we have a list of questions to go along with both types of templates that you should think about and consider as yourself and also as a group when you are developing your social media template or your social media guidelines. So these are some more questions that go a little bit more in depth that everybody should think about when they're writing this policy. So now Josephine, when she switches back to our PowerPoint, is going to get us started talking about social media platforms and management tools.
Hold on just a second. Let me find my actual, there we go. Okay. All right, so I'm going to be talking, this is Josephine Smith. I'm going to be talking about navigating social media at your particular library. So we're going to have a quick poll quickly. We're going to quickly do a poll to try to get a sense of what platform do you currently use and what platform do you want to learn more about. Thank you.
And we're just talking which one you use most frequently. I know a lot of libraries use both. Just to keep it simple, which one do you use the most?
Right. And so as you guys are filling that out, I'm going to go through and kind of go over some of the top ones and kind of how to think about them differently. And then once I see the results, I can speak more specifically to which ones are used most frequently. Okay, so on the document that I recently showed, and I'll actually pull that back up if you don't mind. Whoops. Oh, okay, so it looks like 71% of you use Facebook. Next highest is 19% at Twitter, and then 10% at Instagram. So I'll make sure to talk a lot about Facebook, but I also think it's worth kind of talking about the ones that maybe are being underutilized just because they do have some valuable things to offer. So in our social media best practices, we do have, sorry, I'm going to scroll really quick, so protect your eyes.
Erin, do you want to launch that next poll about which one do you want to learn most about? Thank you.
Thank you. So as she's doing that, I'm going to just give us a quick overview of what's in our broader guide. So I do have the kind of most popular social media platforms, including links, number of users, average age of users, how many times we're recommending posts per posting, what types of content, how much time it takes to create the content, and then potential uses. Most of this information I got from the websites themselves, other than the stuff that was generated by us in terms of like recommended users and that kind of thing. So I do have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all the other top ones. So if you want to take a moment to peruse that a little bit more closely now or moving forward, please do feel free. So these are the ones that are talked about in the document. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, LinkedIn, Flickr, Snapchat, Blogger, Tumblr, WordPress, and Wix. Those last two, WordPress and Wix, are actually blog platforms. So just wanted to pull those out. So one thing that is really important to think about as you're identifying how you're going to use social media platforms at your library is what types of okay, so 60% of you want to learn about Instagram, and then 20% of you Twitter, and then the others are kind of under 10% in terms of Facebook, Snapchat, YouTube, Pinterest, Tumblr, etc. Okay, so one thing that's really important to focus on when you're identifying how you're going to be using your different platforms is what types of content you're going to be populating. So I did do a quick breakdown where which platforms are text focused, image focused, and then have a balance between text and image. So Facebook, any blogging websites like Blogger, Wix, or WordPress, and then Tumblr are Tumblr is actually more image focused, but are kind of text and image together, like a decent balance. So you can have a lot of text, but you can also have a lot of images. Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, Snapchat, Flickr, and Tumblr as well generally are a little bit more image focused. And in that, they'll have you can have comments or blurbs underneath, but generally it's pretty short. Twitter and LinkedIn are, to me, seem a little bit more text heavy. Twitter, you repost a lot, but generally it's like the quick characters. You're not really generally posting images. So when you're selecting the best platforms for your library, you're going to want to think about staff support, audience, and content. So for your staff, you want to be thinking about how many people will be posting. Is it just you, or is there a team of people that you're coordinating? And there are also challenges with that. How are you going to schedule those posts? How are you going to assign it? Are you going to have one person do it each week? Are you going to have one person do each day? Are you going to have it thematic? So if you do one type of post in a week, is someone going to be in charge of, come visit us at the library posts every week, or Throwback Thursday post? Another thing to consider in terms of staff time is how much time do you have for content creation. That social media platforms talks about how much it takes to build content, and probably and image are probably, to me, take the most time, with the exception of maybe YouTube, because you really have to think about balancing what are you putting up in terms of text versus images, and are you balancing that well, and what are the messages that you're sending across, and in addition to how much time do you have for a specific type of content creation, how much can you create that content on a regular basis, because most social media platforms do require you to engage with it, even if you do it as Emily mentioned, kind of early and then have it scheduled out. You still have to take some time to make sure that that's set up and planned. In terms of audience, I found this a really useful kind of data point when I'm thinking about who am I trying to reach with social media. So you want to think about who is your target audience. You might have more than one, and how do they use social media or the internet. And really you want to think about, are you having specific posts geared towards specific audiences? Are you having a post that's geared towards your entire constituency, not broken down by demographic? So that's just some things to consider. As you can see on the graph in front of you, younger, kind of 18-24 use YouTube, and then the kind of 29 to 30 use Facebook, and a little bit of Snapchat, and then the 50 plus use Twitter a little bit, it looks like. But so you have the percentage of people that use it, and then the post of them, like the different types of platforms. So take a minute to look at that. That is also in our social media guide, but this gives a really nice breakdown of who's looking at what. And one thing that I do want to note, and Emily kind of pointed to this before, is that you want to think about, as you're thinking about who's using what, there might also be an inconsistency between the amount that something is used and the way that they want to be reached by you through that platform. So for example, there's some research that shows that while a lot of teens and young adults are using Snapchat, a lot of millennials do not want Snapchat to be a way to connect with organizations or to find out kind of what's happening. That's more of a social platform. So that's also something to keep in mind, not just where is your audience, but also how would they want to use the platform that you're trying to engage with them on. So in terms of content, the things to consider most are, how are you mapping your content for your posts to both the purpose of that specific content, the purpose of how that purpose fits into a broader policy. So, if you have a series of posts about one topic, how that's mapping to the overall audiences you're trying to reach or engage with. You really want to think about how your platforms can work together. I know at SHIP, because we don't have one person that's sole, or even a major part of their position is working with our social media and outreach. We have to kind of repost things. So we kind of generate most of our content on the blog and then cross-post a lot. And so that's another kind of larger issue of kind of creating content sustainably and identifying ways that you can create your content sustainably. And that kind of brings me to our next section of the webinar, where Emily's going to talk a little bit more about engagement and sharing and how you can do that in a smart way.
Thanks, Josephine. And yeah, one of the last things that you mentioned about making sure that you are sharing your message on a platform where people want to hear it is really important. So in thinking about your audience, definitely think about the age. How they access the internet is also a really important thing. So if your users are primarily on a browser and they're going to be on a standard computer, they won't be able to access Instagram. Well, they can, but it's very suboptimal. They won't be able to access Snapchat, things like that. So think about your primary audience. How are they accessing the internet? For me, my students are going to be mostly using a phone, and then my staff members and my faculty members will probably be using phone and desktop. So that's why we target them on Facebook versus targeting our students primarily on Instagram. So you also need to think about the time commitment that each platform involves. And so as Josephine mentioned, that is in our best practices document. We do detail how much time you have to dedicate to posting, as well as how much time you have to dedicate to creating content for that platform. If you're thinking about something like Facebook, it's lower commitment, but in terms of creating the content, but you do need to post almost daily. Where something like YouTube, maybe you only have to post once a week, but it requires a much higher time commitment and equipment commitment to be able to make that content. So looking at our best practices for engagement and sharing, like I said, how often can you post? At my library, it is just me. My boss also is an administrator on our Facebook page, but I don't think that it's something that he wants to do or honestly totally understands how to do. So it's, it really does fall to me to make sure that content gets up there, which is why I use a scheduler, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And I see a question here, why do you have to post several times a day on Facebook? I wouldn't say several, but at least once a day. And it's just to, again, with the algorithms that most of these platforms are based on, if you do not post on a regular basis, it is less likely that your content will show up in people's feeds. So your posting history has an impact on how frequently your content, unless you're paying to promote it, is going to show up in front of your followers' faces. So if you only post every once in a while, your content is much less likely to show up on a feed without you doing a paid boost through Facebook.
And also, Emily, I just want to add too that depending on the platform, your users that are following you, so not just the algorithm popping it up, but if you don't create content regularly, they're not going to see it, not just from the algorithm, but if it's not there, like if you post once every week, once every 2 weeks, and they're checking, and most people are posting every day, even if it is pulling it to the top, you want to think about like, how is that balancing out with everything else that's in their feed? So if you consider, for example, on Twitter, if people are tweeting, every hour, and you're only tweeting, and you only kind of are tweeting, once a day, it might not be an effective way to engage with your audience. So not just the algorithm, but also just the kind of, you're competing with all of the other people on that platform to reach your users.
Thanks, Josephine. Yeah, so when you're selecting a platform, definitely think carefully about how much time you have to dedicate to that posting schedule. And if the platform that you're using makes it easy to reshare content. So as we mentioned already, Twitter, Tumblr, and Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook make it really easy to reshare others' content. Instagram is one of those ones where it's not easy to reshare others' content. So you'd have to dedicate your time to either scheduling it on a manager that can post for you, or having to manually go in and upload all of that content at a specific time of the day. You also need to think about the kind of content that you are comfortable sharing. So part of that is going to be the message that you have established in your policy. If it's something that is really, you think it's funny or thought-provoking, as the poem in our one case study went, that can totally backfire. It might get people talking, but it could be completely talking about the wrong thing and create a lot of problems for you. So think carefully about the kind of content that you're comfortable sharing on your post. And when you're going to post something, think about, does this promote the message or the image of the library that we have set forth in our policy guidelines? Does it promote a bookish community? As June said, for my library, is it promoting activities on campus? Is it engaging with our students and sharing resources that they would feel are useful to them? And if not, it's probably not something that we want to share. Similarly, you also need to think about the kinds of accounts that you're going to follow and to engage with by liking or sharing their content. Those of you that work with students, either in the K-12 setting or in my case, in Josephine's case, in the college setting, I have a lot of our students that follow our accounts. That's great. I want them to do that. But I also think very carefully about following any of those accounts back, because students post a lot of things on their social media feeds that would not really be appropriate for anyone at my library to be liking or promoting. It's very personal, and we want to kind of maintain those boundaries. So it's really best practices to follow other organizations, follow other libraries, things like that, and engage with the content that they are posting rather than the individual user content that children or other people may be posting kind of their own lives. So be aware of that and think about that when you are going to follow additional accounts and engage with the content that they post. Also, think about where you can find ready-made content. I'm going to be out of the office completely next week, so kind of coming up with original things to post all week might be a little bit of a struggle. So that's when I turn to other resources like the New York Public Library. Have they posted anything interesting lately that we can share? Or I'll look to some of the resources like the Library of Congress or the National Archives. They have a lot of online library content that anyone with an internet connection can access. We also have, I believe, the centennial of the women getting the right to vote. So there are some big displays and some online displays that are going up in our nation's libraries that we can share, that anyone can access, that make great content that don't require a lot of time from me. Going along with that, you need to think about how you're crediting others' content. So if you're not using a platform where the library that you are getting that content from or the organization that you're getting that content from would automatically be tagged, make sure you provide a link back or some other type of credit as part of your content so that your users can find that original content and also realize that it is not yours. So we always want to give credit to our content creators.
And we'll be talking a little bit more about some of those issues later in the webinar.
Okay, so now we're going to talk specifically about some of the tools, both low-tech and high-tech, that you can use at your library to make it easier for you to share content, stay on a regular schedule, and engage with your users. The first one is the most basic one, and this is a content calendar. If any of you are members of the Pennsylvania Library Association, you should be aware that PA Forward and the Public Relations and Marketing Committee of the association puts together a content calendar every year. So when you go to conference, you physically can get a copy of the calendar. I just found mine when I was cleaning up my desk the other day. And then quarterly, to go along with that content calendar, we release content packages with awareness press releases of different celebrations or awareness days that are happening in that particular quarter. Images for you to use on your social media to draw attention to any of those particular holidays or awareness days. Hashtags to use and additional resources that you may want to explore to find additional content. But you don't only have to use someone's pre-made calendar. It is really just a monthly or yearly editorial planning tool, so you can make your own calendar or work off of one that already exists. If you are working in an academic library or a public library, you probably have some type of calendar of holidays already that exist for your organization that has, this is when we're closed for staff training, this is when ad drop starts, this is when graduation is. Work off of that calendar and add in a little bit more content. And then you can think ahead to some posts that you may want to schedule to let your users know there's going to be a change in services, or let's celebrate all of our graduates. Thanks for all the work that you've done. Oh, we're having finals de-stress. These are just some things that I keep on my calendar that I can schedule, and it allows me to plan far in advance, like I have done for the month of May. And then you don't slip any of those important holidays. They don't fall through the cracks. You can make sure that all of those stay at the forefront and you have ready-made content for those days. All right. Next, we're going to talk about some management platforms. So there are management platforms that are built directly into some of the social media platforms. There also are platforms that you can add on to manage multiple platforms at once. So the benefits of a management platform are that they can allow you to schedule content for one platform or across different platforms. And they may allow you to share posting responsibilities with multiple users. So for example, if you have a Facebook business page, you can add additional people on there. So like I mentioned, my supervisor is also on our Facebook page. So if he wanted to, he could also add content, or if we wanted to add other library users to that, those people could add additional content to our Facebook page. And then a general management platform would allow you to make accounts for anyone that has posting responsibilities at your library, and they can all share posts to that platform, and then they don't have to go specifically into your Facebook or your Instagram or your Twitter to post those directly. Everything would be posting from the management platform. It's really helpful if you have multiple accounts. So if your library only uses Facebook, you may only want to use the Facebook scheduler. That's totally fine. But if you have an Instagram and a Twitter, it brings all the feeds into one place. Things that you want to consider about these platforms, though, those that are not directly built into a social media platform may not be free. A lot of them operate on a freemium model, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and they may not work for all platforms. So Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are the most commonly supported ones. If you're really active on Pinterest, Tumblr, things like that, you may or may not be able to import those platforms into your manager. It really just depends on the platform. I know one of them specifically, they do support Pinterest, but that's not part of their free model. So if you want to use Pinterest on that manager, you have to pay a fee to be able to use Pinterest on the manager. And as part of that freemium model, the manager may limit the number of posts or the number of user accounts that you can have based on the account type that you have. So on the next slide, I have a few of the most popular management platforms, and more information about all of these platforms is in our best practices document. So right now I kind of have the summary for all three, but they are broken down into very specific detail for each management platform and a recommendation for who might want to use which platform. So the top three are Hootsuite, Buffer, and Later. I use Hootsuite at Penn State Harrisburg. The free versions of each of these allow you to connect up to 3 social media accounts. So primarily that would be Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And then you can schedule 30 posts per month. It depends on the platform. Some do 30 posts total, and some do 30 posts per social media feed. So you could have 30 Facebook posts, 30 Instagram posts, and 30 Twitter posts. And generally, if you're using a free account, you can only have the one social media manager account. If you wanted to add additional people to the account, you'd have to pay a fee. Just be aware, if you are using Instagram, since a lot of people wanted to learn more about Instagram, Instagram does not allow you within the app to schedule anything or to repost any content. You have to use additional platforms to be able to do that. So there are a few different apps that will let you repost an Instagram post. You can also you can screenshot it on a phone and repost it manually, and you cannot schedule anything. So if you want to schedule posts on Instagram, you absolutely do have to use some type of management platform. Otherwise, everything has to be put in manually.
Emily, can I just jump in for a moment? I wanted to say that at SHIP University, we use an example of one of those apps would be Preview. It is a free app that lets you create the post and kind of create a notification for when you want to post it. So you can create posts in advance, save them, have a notification that will pop up on your phone, and then you go in and post it to Instagram. So Instagram won't post it for you, but Preview is an example of one of those apps that can kind of help you keep track and create content beforehand for you to individually post. So I just wanted to add that in.
Thanks. So if you did want to use some more of those options from the management platforms, depending on the options and the size of the organization, a subscription could range between $9 at the cheapest end and $600 a month at the most expensive end. These platforms allow you to manage all streams from one dashboard, or you can put the same content across all platforms. If you're using Instagram, another good thing to know about is a link manager on the next slide. So if you haven't used Instagram before, or you're just kind of playing around with Instagram, be aware that in the posts that you put on Instagram, links do not work. So you can type them in there, but they will not be clickable. And you only get one link in your Instagram bio. So your profile has one link, and you have to manually swap that out. A link manager allows you to kind of create a landing page for links. So you can just have the one link that your users will click on, and then there will be a list of links for them to choose from that you can add or remove at your leisure. The two main ones available on a freemium model are Tap Bio. So Tap Bio, for a free account, you can add 3 links to your profile for free. And then if you want to add more, it's $5 to $12 a month, depending on your options. And then you can also see analytics for who clicks your links and when. Linktree allows you to have free links, and an unlimited number of those, but they will be branded for Linktree. If you jump up to that $6 subscription, you can customize your page with your own images and branding. You can also add an option for signing up for emails from you, and you can access your link analytics. Then finally, I'm just going to talk briefly about a couple places that you might want to try out for creating your own content. If you don't have any type of graphic design software at your library, I would strongly suggest you check out Canva. So it's canva.com. It is a freemium model there. If you are at a public library, unfortunately, academic libraries, this does not work for us, but public libraries, if you are a nonprofit organization, you can actually get a paid account for free. You do need to apply for it and provide some documentation, but that can be a nice option for you. They have a lot of really great preset graphics that are already in the correct sizes for sharing on Instagram and Facebook. They're optimized for that, and you can either design your own or work from templates. They're very eye-catching, they're very easy to use, and it's a really great place to get started. So I definitely really recommend Canva if you haven't checked that out yet. If you need images and you're not necessarily so photographically inclined, there are a lot of great places to find free stock photography online. So a couple that we mentioned here are Pixabay, the Flickr Creative Commons, Getty Images Free, and AvoPix. And the last one, AvoPix, has, in addition to images, there's free illustrations and free vector graphics that you can make to any size. They won't get pixelated. And all of these are explained in detail in our best practices document if you'd like to learn more about them. And now Josephine is going to talk to us a little bit about the legal considerations.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of talk about our kind of broader policy legal implications, and then I'll delve a little bit more into intellectual freedom and privacy, just because those are kind of the big issues. So when you are creating your policy, you want to make sure that it's reviewed by either the library council or your administrative body, whoever that is, just to make sure that they sign off on it. There are some really great resources on ALA's website, both for copyright and for intellectual freedom. And they also have some really good privacy policy resources, especially for social media. So I highly recommend going and kind of not reinventing the wheel. They give really good language. They give really good scenarios for when you're thinking about it, and they break it down very nicely. So I highly recommend that. Just to think about privacy and the privacy policy that you have specifically, this comes into play a lot, obviously, with your patrons. So patron privacy is basically the idea that they have the right to open inquiry without scrutiny. So the idea of, if somebody's interested in a book about satanic worship, they may or may not want that to be publicly broadcasted on an open forum. So kind of referring back to Emily's example of early on in the webinar of, you wouldn't want to post information about a book that a patron checked out or requested through interlibrary loan, because they have a right to that type of inquiry without publicly posting it. The other kind of important issue with privacy policy is patron confidentiality. So the big concept to keep in mind for this is your personally identifiable information. So individual's name, address, telephone number, obviously social security number, driver's license number, all of those things. And that basically connects it can connect you to what you bought, what you've checked out with your library card, what websites you visited. And actually, so one thing with that is, you know, if you're trying to collect any kind of data on your users on like via social media, just keep in mind the privacy policies that or privacy issues that might come into play if they haven't signed to you the rights to kind of use their data to make decisions. So that's something to keep in mind, especially if you're ever going to be publishing on any of this or presenting on it. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're creating your social media policy and kind of thinking about what types of information will be shared, how you're going to protect your patrons' privacy, etc. And like I said, there's ALA has a lot of really good resources, and it also is talked about a little bit in our best practices guide. So in terms of intellectual freedom in the First Amendment, I just wanted to have some important definitions up. We all know the First Amendment is obviously freedom of speech, but I think it's important to identify what constitutes as unprotected speech. So what are the types of things that are not protected under the First Amendment? And so that would be copyright violations, obscenity, child pornography, defamatory or libelous comments, imminent or true threats against the library staff, or other users. So no patron has the right, for example, to post like, you know, I'm going to blow up the library. You know, I would say that might go under unprotected speech. But so that's something to keep in mind when you're drafting the policy in your policy, your privacy and intellectual freedoms section. And then in terms of something else to keep in mind specifically for social media is that it does constitute as a designated public forum. So it can be subject to pretty strict scrutiny in regards to the First Amendment because it is open to the public, unless it's a private group page. That's something else to consider. And so obviously libraries are able to impose like time, place, or manner regulations, but content-based speech restrictions can bring a lot of that strict scrutiny from the courts if a patron decides to, you know, call you out. So that's something that's really important to consider, because you don't want to have a situation like what happened at the library that June mentioned, the Aurora Public Library. So some things to keep in mind, I mentioned the information and data collected via social media. So if you were trying to get a sense of, you know, how patrons are engaging with you or who your users are or anything like that, if you're just collecting the data for internal stuff, that might be a little bit more appropriate. But if you're going to be collecting it to make decisions that you in the future would report on to other bodies or make public, that is something that's you're going to need to take privacy issues into consideration. And then I also did want to note that for public libraries, you may face even more scrutiny in terms of banning or removing content just because of the free speech issues. And a lot of times university libraries, because they're under the larger organizational structure of the university itself, they already have set pretty strict guidelines that you would be following as an academic library. So public libraries, because of the more public nature of the organization, and because a lot of times you don't have the same kind of larger kind of parent organization to kind of shape your content, that's something to keep in mind. That kind of brings us to the end of our webinar. We wanted to give some time for questions. Emily, did you have anything else that you wanted to add or conclude?
No, thanks everybody for joining us today. We did have one person mention in the chat that with a website called iStock Photo, you can download a free photo weekly and a monthly video, as well as illustrations. And so yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to type those in the chat. Please check out our documents. We are able to go into even more detail than we had time for today here. We're happy to take any questions via email as well, if you would like to email us. And this content will all be available on the CRD website soon. So we hope this was beneficial to everybody.
And at this point, obviously, like Emily said, if there's questions, post them, and then we're going to be having a little bit of a discussion, so there will be time to talk at that point.
Don't think we have time for discussion.
Oh,
but
okay, well then never mind.
We're happy to answer questions.
Yes.
Yeah, so please feel free to use the chat box to put your questions in. While you're doing that, I just wanted to thank Emily, Josephine, and June for presenting for us. Erin has put a link to our survey in the chat box, so I'd hope everyone would take a few minutes to fill that out and let us know your thoughts on today's presentation and about our programming in general. I'm going to ask that Erin also put her email address in the chat box. If you're not a PALA member and you're interested in becoming one, or if you have suggestions for future discussions or presentations, or if you would like to present with us, we would love to hear from you. Okay.
I'm seeing a question. Oh, yeah, sorry. I am seeing a question in terms of using scheduling software. So for Instagram, nothing actually posts to Instagram. The closest I've seen, and Emily mentioned this as well, is apps or content managers that will notify you when, like, you can say, okay, on this day, I know I want to post this content to Instagram. It will notify you, and they do make it easier to post. You can post from there, I think, and then, like, you can click and then
Hootsuite does post directly to Instagram.
Oh, it does. Okay.
Scheduler, yeah. So if you're using one of the main platforms like Hoot later, those Instagram has changed some of the specifications on what can be posted. But if you're just doing a standard post, that will post. And I am most familiar with Hootsuite because that's the one that I use, and it will definitely post for you. But there are some, it's basically just your standard photo and text post. Some of the hashtags, if you're using a lot of hashtags, don't work. Things
and
like
the links as well, right? Links don't.
Yeah, links will never work.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So Cassandra says you can't do an album. So one of the things that you can do on Instagram now is make an album out of a post and have up to 10 photographs in one post that your user can swipe through. So you cannot do that from a scheduler. It's a single image post only.
Right. So if you know you're going to be doing a single image regularly, Hootsuite would be the place to do it. If you are going to, on top of that, try to have a couple of the albums and stuff, I think that's something where you'd want to have an app to kind of create the content, and then you would just go in and post it to Instagram yourself, I would guess. Is that how you kind of feel about it, Emily?
Yeah, I mean, I use both. For Instagram, there will be times where I just go in and post myself, and obviously if you want to use other features, that's great. When I know I'm not going to be around, I'm scheduling single image posts because that makes my life work.
Well, and that's the bread and butter. Like, especially for Instagram is another one that you want to post pretty regularly too. So if you're kind of wanting to have some kind of baseline, and then if you have anything special, you can always go in and post yourself, but then at least the content is created. Okay, are there any other questions?
Do you have your email addresses somewhere for us if we wanted to contact you?
I can put mine in the chat.
Yeah, I can put mine in the chat.
I think they might be in the document.
They're in the document, and are they going to be, are they part of the, I think they're part of the description for this webinar, is that true? Or is it just our information, like our names and stuff? Like once the webinar is posted?
I am not sure, but I think if we put them in the chat, they can be added to the blog post.
Yeah, I can add mine too.
We don't normally add people's email addresses to the webpage, mostly because I don't want people to spam you.
Thank you.
I don't want people to spam you.
And we have a comment that says they'd like to see a survey of what libraries budget for social media in terms of Facebook ads, Hootsuite, Buffer, etc. Yeah, that could be a really interesting project. I know at my library we budget $0.
Well, and I think the social media activities are really hard to budget for. It's actually something that we talk about at my library, because so much of the I guess money of it is actually in personnel time, as opposed to, if you're trying to build up a level of engagement where you're having, questions or like, any kind of contests or activities, and you want to kind of build in for a contest like prizes and stuff, that would be like a budget line. But like an actual separate money. But I think a lot of it goes into just like work hours, because it does take quite a bit of time to create the content. Yeah, so I think my library, we don't really have a strict line budget. It's like if we have a contest that we're posting through social media, we just pull it out of like the kind of special money fund if our dean can find it.
June, do you guys budget anything?
Sorry about that. We have, not specifically for social media, I don't believe, but we do have a marketing budget.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's kind of common.
So a question about what are our thoughts on social media strategies versus having an official social media policy. My library currently just has a strategy, but not an official policy. I would say it's really important to have a policy. I'm not sure how large your organization is, but if you have especially if you have a lot of people, or any number of people that are going to be posting on your library's behalf. I hate to put it in this kind of frame, but if there were to be problems that came up, it's really important to have an official policy to point to in order to discipline someone or to make accountability professionally for whatever occurs. And if there isn't a policy, it could be a lot harder to say that someone did something inappropriate, especially given your library type. If you're in a public library, you really could find yourself in a bad situation if you are potentially sued for deleting people's comments and things like that. So having a policy that can stand up to the scrutiny of the First Amendment, which there's a lot of resources on the ALA Intellectual Freedom website that will help with that. But for my opinion, it's really good to be there for accountability and for behavior standards.
And I think just jumping off of the behavior standards, I think another thing, especially if you have your social media policy public, which I think is also really important. We also at my library only have kind of a very broad social media policy, because we kind of, even just saying though that we follow the broader social media policy of the university gives us something to fall back on. But I actually am in the process of kind of talking to my colleagues to kind of create something library specific, just because I think in terms of managing discussions, it can be really nice to have a transparent, here's what we allow, here's what's protected, so that if you see something online as you're monitoring kind of going in a dangerous direction, you can always refer to the policy and have that in your profile information as well, in terms of like, here's the rules that we try to follow. And I think having that really transparent and laid out for your constituents can be really useful to refer back to. So same kind of like CYA of like, internally, but also I think externally, like just kind of laying out in a very transparent fashion the rules of engagement.
I think that's a really good idea. And I think that kind of goes along with like your library has a circulation policy, so that if questions come up at the reference desk about whether something is allowed, your staff has a policy to point to, and it like we said, it empowers them to be able to make more sound decisions because there is a policy in place. It doesn't have to be a gray area. There are rules that we can all read and understand and feel like we're making a sound decision based on what the policy is.
And I mean, some of this might be a semantics thing too. It depends on what's in your social media strategies versus an overall policy. Another thing I will say from an assessment standpoint, because I'm the instruction and assessment librarian, having a policy where you lay out who your audience is, what kind of deliverables you're hoping for to gain from your social media engagement and activities can be really nice if you're trying to demonstrate library value, if you're trying to assess which platforms are actually being used and if they're being used effectively. So some of that also can be just having that structure in place for internal decision makings can be also very useful. again, it depends on what's in your actual strategies. Like, if you're just kind of having a timeline of posting, that's really useful, but I think that it doesn't help as much for the broader kind of structural elements.
I agree, Josephine and Emily. I think that having a policy in place is really very important for all of the reasons that you stated, and because the line between personal and professional on social media is becoming so blurred.
You're welcome. Any other questions from anyone? So yeah, if you haven't used a content calendar before, I will put in a plug for the PR and Marketing Committee's calendar. I am a member of that committee, in full disclosure, but it is one way to at least get 1 or 2 posts every month that you don't have to think about, because they are already done for you in the calendar. And then there's some additional resources always included that you can learn more and find some more content that you may want to share. So those go up on the PA Library's website. There's a few clicks to get in there. It's under PA Forward, but that is something that is always great to use. And Lori, one of our PALS mentors, Lori Lysek, says that guiding documents and policies can be living documents. Absolutely. You can always change those based on what is happening. And that's one of the things that I mentioned early on about talking about the policy, is that you can and maybe should have something in your policy about how to update the policy or how to add or remove accounts if things change. We specifically put that language in the policy for the Library Association that is under consideration right now, because there are inactive accounts, and you never know what social media thing is going to pop up next, be it a controversy from a platform. So a lot of people are questioning, if certain organizations or even individuals should be on Facebook based on what they do with user data. So those are always things that can continue to grow and evolve, and your policy and any type of guidance documents can grow and evolve with that as well.
And just a quick best practice note in terms of guiding documents and policies. One thing that I think is a really useful strategy is having somewhere a date, like policy date effective. So if you're going through multiple drafts, that's fine. Like it's completely within the parameters of, I think, best practice to be updating your policies and guiding documents on a fairly regular basis, because social media changes pretty quickly, and you want to respond to the kind of environment that you're in. But I think it is really useful, the same way that we, date any drafts of like other documents that we're working on, having a date, effective date, or some kind of information in terms of which draft you're working with can be really useful, especially in terms of clarification. So if a patron or an outside constituent has a question or has it refers to an earlier draft of a policy, then you can kind of very clearly have an answer of like, yeah, that was this was changed for this reason, and all of that. So I think that's a quick best practice that I wanted to note.
And Erin mentioned that she has issues with how Facebook is using user data, and I agree.
Yep.
All right, well, if no one else has any questions, I guess we can wrap up.
Can sign off. All right, this is Josephine Smith again. I just wanted to say thank you so much to my co-presenters. This was really fun, and thank you so much to the audience. You had some really great questions. I hope that this was helpful. We really do hope that you kind of take the time to look through our best practices document, and shoot us any emails if you have questions or follow-up, anything like that.
Yep, I agree. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Emily and Josephine.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks, June.
All right, everybody, have a great day. Happy Thursday.
Bye.
Bye.